This is People Are the Worst, the show where leadership meets reality, because navigating people and people problems isn't just part of the job, it is the job. Join us as we tackle the messy, the maddening, and the downright ridiculous, and explore how to lead through it all with clarity, courage, and maybe some caffeine. I'm Lindsay.
And I'm Lucy, and today we're going to discuss how to navigate tricky conversations around compensation. Now, for most of us, conversations involving money with people that we're not related to can be a little daunting and uncomfortable. Conversations about compensation with direct reports most certainly fall into this category, but no matter how uncomfortable they are, they still need to get done. And when done right, they can be a really great opportunity to reinforce and reward performance.
All right, let's dive in. Comp's always spicy.
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 Like our spicy margaritas.
I know, like I was going to say. Spicy margarita right now.
Our team this holiday got us like a whole care packet for spicy margaritas with like a spicy margarita mix, and they'd written these lovely things in a card for Lindsay and me, and they'd then designed these sweatshirts with spicy margaritas on the front, which was so great, and I've worn mine all the time. Everyone comments on it. Anyway, that was just a spicy interlude. Carry on, Lindsay.
Not spicy, and think of spicy margaritas. Okay, so Lisa called in, or emailed in, I should say, and ask, how do you frame compensation discussions when an employee is not receiving an increase? Ooh, this is tough. Don't you wish you could just be like, I'll be honest, you don't deserve a raise this year. But in all seriousness, obviously we can't say that. So what are your thoughts, Luce? How do you deal with this?
That's a tough one. We do get this one a lot. And I know we say that a lot, that we get this one a lot, but this is why we're doing these questions and helping people with the answers to them, because, every manager has to do compensation conversations, and it's really hard to know how to word them. And it's really hard to get the balance right between kind of being the friend but then being the manager. And then that it's going to be disappointing, and nobody likes to disappoint other people off the bat. It's it's lovely when you have a compensation conversation where the news is great and you can say they have a raise, but when they don't, it's tough. So, I would say, especially when the news is tough and you've got to navigate a person who's not getting a raise, by all means, start with a few pleasantries, but essentially the core message about their comp needs to be the very first thing you say. It's a little bit like a firing conversation when obviously you're not firing them, but like it really has to be the first thing that's on the agenda. They're sitting there, they're on the edge of their seat, they're waiting to hear the number. So don't prolong the agony, right? The main thing here is to stick to the facts and lay out the comp clearly. Something like, I know that compensation is a significant topic, and I appreciate us having this time to discuss it today. You won't have an increase in your base salary in this cycle, and I'm sorry about that. However, there have been a couple of adjustments to your benefits that I'll talk you through, and your equity package didn't change. So you're just completely factual about it. And now you then need to talk about the rationale behind the decision. And this you want to make sure that you've prepared ahead of time so that you have your talking points bulleted out and you can go through those. And again, those may be very factual as well. Then you want to stop talking. Stop talking and let them react. And if they have questions you don't know the answer to, do not try and come up with something on the spot. Tell them that you'll get back to them with an answer in a reasonable time frame. Now, if they're upset, which I'm sure has happened to a lot of you who are listening to this, if they're upset, empathy really is going to be your friend. Be empathetic. I am sorry this wasn't the decision that you were hoping for, as I know you've put a lot of effort in this cycle. I can see that you're frustrated, and I imagine that you have more questions for me. So listen actively, avoid being defensive, own the conversation, and allow them to vent if they need to. That's okay. You're there to hold the space. Allow them to vent if they need to, and really emphasize that you're there to support them. And then just lastly, I would just say, set expectations with them about when they're going to receive the confirmation letter and any other sort of follow-ups that you agree to.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, no one wants to deliver that message. And a lot of us probably in this market for many companies are going to have to deliver that message. Yeah, I think you're right. Like getting to it straight away and just sticking to the facts. Like the more factual you can make it and then lead with the empathy and the emotion, I think is like, the right arc.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's not fun.
Well, onwards to question 2, which we have in from Alan. He asked, do you have performance conversations, so performance reviews, and the compensation discussion at the same time and bolted in there? Or is it best to separate them out and then be 2 completely separate conversations?
Yeah,
Liz,
great question. Yeah. As we know, the fact is humans just have a really hard time processing feedback.
Yeah.
So we got to make it easier. So ideally, the order of operations, I should say, is performance cycle ends. So you separate the 2, bottom line. It's like you have your performance cycle, it ends, and then your compensation cycle begins. But if your company combines them, even if that is the case, I really suggest not wrapping them into literally the same conversation.
Yeah.
You can have your performance review and then 2 weeks later or 1 week later, you can be like, okay, and then we're going to follow up and we're going to talk about comp. And the reason for this is that during that review and that performance review conversation, you really want your direct reports focus to be on their behavior, the impact, the ways in which you want them to develop, really having that, curious conversation, giving that feedback. If you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, these are all the topics dealing with more of the upper bits. As soon as you bring in compensation into part of that agenda, that brings the base of the pyramid into the picture. Their psychological safety, their social needs, and just the reality is from, sitting in these or giving these yourself, right? The reality is if you are lumping it all together, they are waiting till the end, and all they end up sort of often caring about or thinking about is what is the number. And it really dilutes the feedback conversation and the performance review. So I would say just really like even a week or even a couple of days, but you really got to separate the 2 and have them have their own genuine focus and agenda.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So you're just going to suggest separating the 2. I think that's right. It's like nobody wants to be thinking about whether they can afford the new car or the holiday they wanted to go on or, whatever it is at the same time as being able to think about their own performance and where they want to grow in the next year or taking the feedback that may have been tough to hear. So I think that sounds great.
I always remember I don't know why, but back when I worked for big companies, it was like back in the day, so pre-remote work. And we'd always get like a sticky note. It's like you'd be in your performance review and then like they'd hand you the sticky note with like the number, you know what I mean? Written down. And so I always remember being like, I wonder what the sticky note's going to say. So anyway.
Oh my God, that's hilarious.
I know. So bottom line is separate the sticky note from the performance review conversation. And yeah.
Well, that's one way.
Also, the other thing too is, sorry, what was that?
I was just going to say, well, that's one way of having the tough conversation around performance, around comp rather, is to stick it on a sticky note and pass it over the table. Napkin, just.
Right. Oh, yeah, I know, right? But I'd also say make sure that they know that you're separating the 2 so they aren't waiting for you to tell them about comp and then you don't have it for them. That's very disappointing. So just be really clear up front. Here's the way we're going to run this, the process this year, this date, then that's going to come. So, you know what I mean? And remind them when you first meet with them, remember, this is performance review. This is not comp. Comp, we're going to talk about in a week, right? So,
yeah.
Cool.
All right. Well, next up, we have a question from Abraham, and he has a situation which I'm sure many of you have either felt yourselves or have had people on your team who've been in this kind of situation. And he says, I have a report who is a senior developer, and in their company, that is an IC level 3. And he has a mid-level developer, an IC level 2, who's noticed that the IC level 3 is not performing as expected. And in fact, the IC level 2 may even be outperforming the level 3. Anyway, the IC level 2 has come to him and said that, he's feeling pretty jaded because he feels like, he's performing better than his peer in this situation. And that he's actually doesn't feel like he's being recognized from a compensation perspective, as he should be, given the difference between him and his peer. And he was interested in hearing what our opinions were on this and how to have the conversation about money with the IC level 2, given that they've noticed that they seem to be, he seems to be performing so much better than his peer who's at a higher level and a higher comp level.
Yeah, this is tricky. So I think, like in any situation, right, you're going to hear it over and over, particularly in the performance review and comp conversations, is empathy is your friend, right? So I think just making sure that you've heard them, right? You're like, I hear what you're saying. It sounds like you feel like you are performing at a higher level than someone who actually has a higher title than you. That's tough.
Yeah.
And then the key thing is you cannot bring someone else's comp or another employee. You cannot create a comparison. You do not want to enter that conversation.
Yeah.
That is like ultimate failure mode, is when you get stuck in this debate about whether someone with that person directly, right? This is very different than calibration, right? When you are talking to the person who's come to you that thinks that they're performing at a higher level than someone else on the team, you do not want to enter that. You do not want to be talking directly to them about how they think they compare to another person on your team. You got to shut it down, because otherwise you end up in this debate. And the reality is that person that you're talking to does not have all the context. And all of a sudden you don't want to get in a situation where you might be providing information that you really shouldn't. At the end of the day too, it's just like, it's not appropriate. And so you got to shut it down. So always like listen to them, hear them, meet with empathy, and then just make the ask and say, listen, let's focus up for this conversation. I want to focus on you. I want to focus on your performance. I want to focus on your compensation. So let's have that conversation. Let's focus on you. And just, if they try to bring it back in, be like, I hear you, and we got to put that aside. This is about you. And just stay that line, and they'll learn. They'll know that like that doesn't work. And then, they also can help share that. Meaning if someone else comes up to them with a similar situation, they can be like, yeah, but just know, so you know, Abraham's not going to let you go there. So you just got to nip that in the butt. I personally remember doing this once to one of our senior leaders, and I was like, explain the situation just like this person did. And I remember he just shut it right down. And I was like, well, good on you. You're right. Like, it shouldn't be a comparison. I was like, noted. Do not talk about someone else in relative to you and how you think you're performing. So, yeah, I would pass along the advice. I think it was helpful, because then I was able to have a productive conversation about my situation, but like, it really shouldn't have been relative to someone else. So,
yeah, it's tricky when someone is like, but I deserve more money than them. And you're kind of, when someone feels like they're deserving of more, then it just makes the conversation so much trickier to have. I would almost like, just to add into that, just try some language along the lines of, I don't know, I'm really sorry. Like, this is sort of the empathy piece. I know that this is not the ideal scenario for you. And I can see that you're disappointed, and I can see that you're making that comparison between yourself and someone else. But, I don't think that it's a great use of our time to like debate who's more deserving. Let's look ahead, and Lindsay, as you say, like focus on your compensation and your performance, and then have that conversation.
Yeah. Nice wording. Yep. Yeah.
All right. Next one, Lindsay, who do we have up next?
Oh, yes. Okay. So Robin is asking, how can I help guide an employee who desires more money? That's really the motivator here.
Yeah.
And wants more responsibility, but lacks initiative to apply themselves to learn new things and expand their knowledge.
Yeah. Yes. no one is going to pay you more if you don't do something different, right? It's just, it's a very hard one to justify from any leadership perspective to, when people, again, this kind of comes back to this deserving point, feels like they deserve more money, but actually hasn't taken on any of that responsibility. And the worst piece of it is that lack of initiative is so frustrating as a manager, because you feel like there's so many different opportunities out there for you to, grab leadership by the horns, or whatever it is that will get you that promotion or get you into that next pay bracket. And I think and no one's going to like my answer to this, because I've said this before in some ways, and I say it a lot in coaching sessions, but you're going to have the more meta, like, step back feedback conversation with them about the issue. And you've got to point out the pattern that you see, so Robin might be like, let's call this person Julie that Robin's dealing with. It might be like, hey, Julie, I hear you. I can see that you're feeling, frustrated because you would like to have an increase in pay. Here's what I've noticed happening. When you come to me with this, when we talk about pay, and when we talk about your role, you say that you want more responsibility. So I hear you say that, but then what I don't see is any action behind that. I'm missing this piece, which is a kind of initiative piece, is a proactivity that I'm not seeing, where you could find some more, things that are going to demonstrate you taking on more responsibility. And you may want to say, look, hands up on my side as your manager. Perhaps I could be more active about finding you some of those things. But I think part of being a leader and getting you into that next pay bracket and getting you a team is to be able to look across the business as a strategic mindset. Look across the business, get your head up out of the day to day and see what needs doing from a process perspective, from a product perspective, what needs doing from a customer service or success perspective. Where are the holes that you are seeing? What are some of the initiatives on the team that we're lacking that you're seeing, and where can you step up and create a process and execute on it for us. And so, this is, I think this is the kind of like more kind of step back conversation that needs to be had. Otherwise you end up getting frustrated because you're like, oh my God, they're just not doing anything. They're not stepping up and saying, like, taking any initiative. And then they're frustrated because they're just like, well, I'm ready. Like, where's my responsibility? I think like a failure mode here though, and we love our failure modes, Linz and I, when we're talking about these kinds of things. Yes, we love falling foul of them ourselves, is not to be too nice, right? This is, and I mean that with all the love in the world, because it's very easy when someone feels they deserve something to be supportive. And that support looks like basically making promises that you can't keep. And when you make those promises that you can't keep, you really get stuck in a hole. Often these conversations are emotional. They might not be outwardly emotional, but people really care about them. So it's tempting to make promises that really assuage your report's emotions or concerns in the moment. And a classic example would just be, simply, well, don't worry. I'll make sure that you get a pay rise in the next cycle, or I'll make sure that you get a promotion in the next cycle. And even if someone else in HR or more senior leadership has made you this promise, it just doesn't make it fail safe. And we've all had instances where we've had to like backpedal on things that we've said. There are forces that are outside of your control, and that you really can't account for. So better to say, and as a result of that conversation, I really do commit to working with you more closely in the coming quarters, to get you that responsibility and that visibility that you want, but obviously only if it's true.
Yeah. I feel like there's conversations where there can be friction, and friction isn't all bad, right? Like so the friction conversation is someone's disappointed and you zoom out, you have the meta conversation, you talk about, here's what I can do, here's what I can't do, right? Then there are relationship ruining conversations where you might not know it in the moment, right? Like, and this is where you make the promises you can't keep, right? And those are sometimes, we can fall into this, like, you're just trying to be nice. You're also trying to get the conversation to end, right? You're like, okay, well, and you end up making these promises. And then when you come back and you can't keep them and you really were in no place to make them, it is very hard to recover.
Yeah.
Recover that relationship at that point. I was just talking to someone on the phone the other day who, working with people for 10 years, like deep relationships, and someone made a promise about comp and everything, and there was no way they were going to be able to deliver on it because they were trying to retain this person, and like that relationship is done. And so don't be afraid of friction and having hard conversations. It is so much safer to enter that territory, and you can build from that actually. But be very scared of making promises that you can't keep or don't have control over. That's dangerous territory.
Yeah. Oh, conversations are so tricky.
They are.
All right, moving on to our next question. This one's from Brian. And he is asking, we've got a lot of guys asking this time, which I love. How do you keep someone motivated when they are at the top of their comp band for the role? The age-old high performer.
So hard.
How do you have that conversation, with that person?
Yeah. This is really hard. I mean, this is just so tricky because this is what happens. Your top performer, particularly too, if it's a really top IC performer and they're not, makes sense for them to be on the IC track and they're really good, but they're just not in that next band. And so they're really pushing against the comp. So even if they had an amazing year, the reality is the raise is pretty small. This is can be incredibly frustrating for the person on your team. So I think here, in an ideal world, and this is just something I think you want to do, whether you're in this situation or not, is to the extent you can, or I would try to always do this, is just it's really important that people understand how comp works at your company. And I think that often, sometimes we as managers don't even really know that well. And sometimes HR runs these, we'll run a session on this, but I would even I would encourage you, it depends on the size of the company, everything. I would pull in HR and be like, I just want to make sure how the team, what is the compensation here? And you can even have them do the presentation or whatever. But I think people don't often always understand the comp structure, the comp philosophy. And so when the outcome comes, they do not understand the context in which you're operating in.
Yeah.
And every company, particularly different stage companies, right? Different size companies, comp can be done quite differently. And so it's really important that the team understands that so that they understand where you're coming from, they understand what they're operating in, right? And they don't just sort of fill in things or get unnecessarily frustrated. So all that to be said, I think best practice for this is upfront, well ahead of comp time, is that and these are things you kind of have to say more than once often, but you just have HR do a presentation, bring HR in or do it yourself, but make sure that everybody understands, here's our comp philosophy, communicate the core principles, explain, which behaviors influence that, who decides, just make sure they understand the whole process. Is there a calibration process? Of course, across what geography, who makes the decision? It's just really helpful. Just the more information and transparency they have, it will only make your job easier. What kind of adjustments, what even kind of adjustments could they even think about? Because they might think, I've been such a top performer and therefore I'm going to get a massive raise. They might not have no idea that, no, they're at the top of their band, right? And so, making sure also they understand when comp cycles even happen, right? Sometimes it doesn't just happen off the spot. It's once a year, twice a year.
Yeah.
What are those? Cash bonuses, promotion, equity awards, what have you? And then criteria, what are the criteria for any comp changes, important comp dates? So anyway, the more information, the better. So, I really encourage, especially as it's comp season right now, like if this isn't done, I would pull in HR or I would put this together, but I would be like, listen, I want to make sure that everyone understands to the extent, as much as possible, the comp, how we think about comp here. The other thing when you do this is you've got to own this decision. This is really important. This is one of those another failure mode is when you're like, well, sorry, it wasn't up to me. I wish I could do it, right? It's like, no. You're a leader of that company. You're the manager. You've got to own the decision and have the confidence in it and be like, this is the decision's been made. This is how we decide comp. So anyway, that's just sort of I think no matter where they're in any situation, I would do this. So apply that going forward. In terms of this situation in particular, this is tough. You got to stick to the facts. You got to be like, it is what it is. I am sorry. And then, empathy is your friend here. And this is also about really this is where it's all about really understanding your employee and what motivates them because they're your high performer, right? You want to make sure that you are, taking care of them in sort of the love language that they like, right? So what else can you do to support them? And also at the end of the day too, like what track are they on, right? And then, but you got to figure out how to take care of them, ultimately, right? In terms of in a way that really motivates them. But for this conversation, you got to own the decision. The more they understand, and it isn't a surprise, right? That's why, even in onboarding, it's really helpful to go through comp because it's not a hot topic yet, right? In terms of how it's structured, but they know, oh, I'm at the top of the band. Okay, they can manage their own expectations. Any other thoughts, Luce?
No, I think that's great. I think we've got three main failure modes around compensation conversations. We've got not owning the decision, which you've just taken us through. And a large part of that is just having some confidence. Just you're the manager, you got this, you can have these tough conversations. And it can ultimately can strengthen the relationship that you have with your direct reports. I think the second failure mode we talked about in no particular order was getting sucked into the debate.
Right.
Getting sucked into those debates, really hard when you're in a comp conversation. And lastly, making promises that you can't keep. I think those are the sort of big three, not only the decision, getting sucked into a debate and making promises you can't keep. I think those are the ones that we see most often folks having challenges with.
Yeah.
And it kind of got me, I don't know, as you were talking, it was getting me thinking about who is it who gets comp raises often? And, we hear a lot with two female founders. We have a lot of women on our team, mostly women on our team. And, we've heard before that nice people are often the most underpaid at work. And so there's this real tension between contribution and compensation, and how sometimes people's kindness and just their good nature means that they're quietly underpaid. And this is I know it's really pervasive through organizations. So I think I think it was an interesting one to think about. What have you seen in your career, Lynn?
Yeah, this is the age-old reality and something as a manager that you really have to nip in the butt, which is the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And I think you got to be so mindful of this because it can happen so easily without ever intending it to, is that some people are going to go and they're going to ask for comp and they're going to push for it. And you being, wanting to help and wanting to solve problems, right, are all of a sudden going, to listen to them and hear them and try to help them out. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, you have rewarded the person that has come to you and asked for more money.
Yeah.
What have you done for the people that didn't ask for more money, right?
Yeah.
And what happens too is that this can unravel pretty quickly on you because word gets out. People will find out that, oh, you want something? You got to be the squeaky wheel. And then all of a sudden you got a team of squeaky wheels and it's a nightmare. So you just got to be really mindful here of when someone comes to you like just listen, be like, I don't know, for me, I just need to like step back, create some space and time because I can get, into solution mode too quickly. And
We love that about you.
My biased action. Yeah. So I think you just got to be real mindful here and put processes put things in place like comp is always in performance reviews. I know it always feels like a ton of work and like a ton of sort of infrastructure behind it, but there's also a reason behind it, right? Like there is a reason for calibration because it makes sure that make sure you look across your whole population base and look and see, like, do we have any gender inequity? Do we have any, what's happening when we look across, right? And what's driving that? And is it really performance or is it actually the squeaky wheel? So I just would say be real careful here. Because you really send a signal when you kind of respond to the squeaky wheel. And it's hard.
Yeah. It becomes part of the culture then.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that was helpful for everybody. And there are so many questions around compensation, which we would love to hear from you. If you have any additional ones that, certain scenarios that we haven't covered that you think would be really helpful for us to cover for you. Generally, if you want to unpack what we've just discussed further, we'd be delighted to connect on LinkedIn. Both our LinkedIn profiles are in the show notes. So do take a second to go down there and add us. And you can learn more about how we support people leaders, how we help managers become the kind of managers they would want to work for at elevateleadership.com. Or you can email us if you have a question. We always love to hear from you at dearlandl, DEARLANDL at elevateleadership.com. And Linz and I will catch you next time on People of the Worst. Bye for now.
Good.